Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE, GMAT, and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we have affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your exam, including a full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free at achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast will get you 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Jeff Eisenberg with us, and Jeff, I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Jeff Eisenberg. It's good to be back. I'm with Long Island Test Prep, and I've been tutoring for the SAT, the ACT, the GRE, along with a bunch of other tests going back to 1991. And like I said, thrilled to be back on GRE Snacks.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to have you back. So today we're going to be talking about GRE versus LSAT for law school admissions. And I think, first I do, while we have a GRE course, we are working on an LSAT course. I do think it's worth noting that the LSAT is still overwhelmingly the common choice, but the GRE has become
Sure.
an alternative option, right? So
Yes.
yeah, just tell me a bit about kind of like, let's start with just like the landscape of kind of what people are using for law school right now.
It's still overwhelmingly LSAT for sure. It's just better known. The trend towards law schools using GRE as a possible option is a relatively new one. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people still don't trust that law schools mean it or that it's not disadvantageous to
Hmm.
go with the GRE. And that's something that I think is worth checking with each individual school. But if you look at the list, it's most of the top law schools. I can't think of an exception at the moment. When you look at who accepts it, pretty much everyone's on board.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. Well, I think just then let's think about kind of who would want to do this, right? Like maybe we'll start by getting into the characteristics of the two tests, right? So the GRE
Sure.
obviously is a much more general test. It's a
Yeah.
lot more focused on the kind of it's a let's call it an advanced version of the SAT or ACT. It's got reading, writing, math, and you're essentially doing like those kind of problems. The LSAT, on the other hand, what's different about the LSAT? Like there's a lot more logic-based problems, right? Like let's talk about sort of what's on the two tests.
And now that they've gotten rid of the analytical reasoning and everyone colloquially would refer to them as the quote unquote logic games, but even in the absence of those, there's overlap, but there's significant differences. The biggest difference is the absence of math. There's
Hmm.
simply no quantitative section on the LSAT. Then you look at the passages that you get even on the verbal reasoning side to compare it to the GRE. The readings are in many cases quite a bit longer, particularly for the reading comprehension as opposed to the logical reasoning.
Hmm.
And it's it's just not nearly as intense as far as vocabulary is concerned. So you do have those significant differences. Then you have areas of overlap where you do, in both cases, have questions asking you what would support or undermine a particular line of reasoning or argument. And so you have commonalities, you have overlap, but at the same time, significant differences.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing is like, let's talk about just like the difference in kind of the problems and what kind of student would be best for each, right? So, I mean, obviously, if you're good at math, you'll be better at
Right,
math. But
right. If you like
who's
math,
good at, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
yeah, you certainly want to give GRE more of a look. If you're someone who maybe was a business major but is looking to the law for graduate school, looking for that as your career, and you may have been much more or a STEM person in general, but you're looking to the law as a potential career, then the GRE may be the better test for you. It's, and again, these are generalities. I don't think there's no one silver bullet that tells you absolutely you must take this test or you must take that. Ultimately, I advise people take a practice test of each, see
Hmm.
where you land. But it's, if math causes you to wake up screaming in the middle of the night, then there's a decent chance that the LSAT's a better exam for you.
Hmm. Yeah, and then just like what kind of person does well on the LSAT, right? Like, you mentioned if you like math, take the GRE, but what if you like, logic puzzles, or what kind of the type of person that does well on the LSAT?
Certainly, while being a good reader is helpful for both, given the lengthier passages and the fact that you have to spend a lot more time focused on a passage that could easily be 800 words or so compared to the much briefer passages that you get, and that it's all that sort of thing. Whereas on the GRE, you're dealing with vocabulary, you're dealing with just very brief sentences and filling in sentence completions. That's a question type that's simply absent from the LSAT. I think the more patience you have for reading and concentrating over a longer period of time, that's going to point towards the LSAT for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense then. Well, then let's talk about just like the relative difficulty of each test. I mean, yeah, what would you say is the harder test just for like a general person?
That's hard to say. I think it really is a matter of what plays to your strengths, along the lines of what we were just saying. What plays to your
Hmm.
strengths more, and that's going to vary by the individual. So I don't know that I would take a stance on one being more difficult on an objective basis. I think it really does come down to how it hits your brain for each individual. So I'm going to not take a stance there. My stance is that there is not necessarily a clear-cut answer to that.
Yeah, okay. Well, then I guess maybe the next thing to talk about is just kind of like, is this a debate that you see coming up a lot with your clients? Like, when did this start? Like, when did the whole GRE taking a law school start?
Really, just in the last 4 or 5 years or so, where it's really
Hmm.
picked up steam. And it used to be just, yeah, it was a rarity. Now it's, as we said, so very common. So it's a conversation I have with most students. Have you looked at the GRE? Do you feel, especially if students coming in with a fairly low LSAT starting point, and they're all locked in on the LSAT because, again, that's the assumption most people come in with law school, LSAT, and they're not aware at all. There's, because it's so new, very few students come in knowing. Very few students, when I mention the GRE, say, "Oh yeah, I've been talking about that with my advisor. We kicked it around." It just that's the way it is. So when someone's coming in with a particularly low LSAT starting point,
Hmm.
I'll go out of my way to bring that up because let's explore that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess then, like, what's the real kind of decision point for these people, right? Like, what's making them pick the GRE over the LSAT or vice versa?
In the end, if they take my advice and they take a practice test and they it shows that in terms of percentiles they're ahead of the game with the GRE, then absolutely. A couple of people have gone with it in that case. Several people, I should say, that I've worked with have gone with that. But it's, as I said, there's a lot of resistance because of the information deficit, the knowledge deficit, just as far as the fact that the GRE is okay to take for law school.
Hmm.
So that there's a lot of just old thinking to overcome. But I do
Right.
liken it to SAT versus ACT on the undergraduate level. You simply want to take the test that will benefit you in admissions and scholarships more so than the other.
Hmm. Right. Well, and so to that end, do you feel like the LSAT still probably gets more scholarships, or do you think that's changing?
I think that if a school's accepting it, the GRE, then they're going to make use of that regardless. But that's again a conversation. If you're unsure, talk to the law schools you're considering
Hmm.
and make sure. But if they're accepting it for admission, they're typically accepting it for scholarship as well. And if a
Well, for
school,
sure
for
that
some
they're
reason,
accepting it for scholarship. I just was wondering if
right,
maybe it'd be a little bit harder because it's not such a well-worn path.
not,
Yeah.
I think with the admissions departments, it still works either way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, then that kind of does also parlay into kind of like the next question, right? Which is like,
Sure.
are there going to be, certain groups of people that this is a better choice for? Like, you mentioned somebody that's coming from like a business school background or something like that, and now they want to get into law. Would you say that there are certain groups that it might be better to take the GRE versus the LSAT, or do you need to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and just start doing legal stuff?
I think it's ultimately taking, as I said before, taking a practice test of each is the ultimate decider. But where you have that low score on the LSAT, where you might be more of a STEM person or someone, who's done a lot of work in stats and math and continued on in college, versus someone who, like myself, I was a history major in both undergrad and grad school. I
Hmm.
took minimal math in college. And although the math on the GRE doesn't reach into college level, you get uh,
You get
some
close.
fancy exponents questions, you get some questions on standard deviation, but only even the standard deviation questions are on the most surface level. But if you're math phobic, if you haven't touched it in a long time, that may be a barrier.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and at that point, it's like, well, there's no math on the LSAT, so why not just like go for it, right?
Sure, sure, sure. But again, I like to see if a student can do better on the GRE. And again, it's about percentiles ultimately, right? We talk about percentiles with grad school much more often than we do with the undergrad exams. But
Hmm.
and that's your basis for comparison. Because after all,
Well, and that's yeah.
there's no
Go ahead.
concordance
Sorry.
of the sort that SAT and AC, that College Board and ACT have gotten together on to produce for their respective exams. And it's a joint document issued by them. They are working on another one, given the changes in both exams, but nothing official from LSAC and ETS has been put forward. So at that point, you need to look at the percentiles to really know where you stand.
Well, and that was going to be my next question is like, is there one that offers a clear advantage in terms of percentiles, right? Because that was the argument for taking the GRE over the GMAT for business schools was generally the
Mm-hmm.
percentiles were a little bit easier for the GRE because everybody who's really, really wound up on MBA takes the GMAT. I'm curious if you feel like there's something similar going on here or not.
Not that I'm aware of, but that's something to continue keeping an eye on because it's important.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then I think the next thing I wanted to talk about was just like, is there a substantial difference in the prep process for these two tests? Like, is one significantly larger or require more time to prepare than the other or not?
I think the on-ramp time frame is about the same. I think
Hmm.
2, 3 months of prep for either gets you ready, but certainly what we're prepping, it's very different because again, even the what they both call reading comprehension are different animals. The existence of math on the GRE itself certainly changes where some of your focus has to be. And the more intensive vocabulary on the GRE. It's nearly as common for a student to look at choices on the LSAT and say, I don't understand what they're even talking about here. Whereas
Hmm.
on the GRE, a student, it's not unheard of for students to look at the choices on a GRE question on the sense completions, for example, to look at them and think, yeah, I don't know, time to guess, because there's
Hmm.
nothing that they recognize. So
Hmm.
there's a different barriers as opposed to, again, someone else who looks at a lengthy passage, which you'll find on the reading comprehension, less so on the logical reasoning of the LSAT,
Hmm.
and get intimidated by that. So part of it comes down to what you're intimidated by and what you're able to overcome. And certainly that's whichever test the student goes with, that's our goal
Hmm.
as test prep experts is to try and get the student to be more comfortable with whichever challenge they're facing, depending on
Hmm.
which exam they're going with. But there's, in some cases, things that would stop a student from even considering one exam or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, speaking of things that would make you consider one exam over the other, I think one thing that I just want to also think about is like, let's say they're kind of equivalent for you. Is one of them significantly cheaper than the other or easier to retake or anything like that, or are they kind of the same?
They're, I believe, the same. It's certainly, I think, cost of registering for the exam is unlikely to make a difference for either student.
Hmm. Either like type of student even.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, then I think then the last question I have is like, well, not the last, second to last question, but this question's what, like, would you ever want to take both? I
Hmm,
mean, certainly, I think if you have a list of schools, like for instance, let's say that you feel better with the GRE, but you have a list of schools that don't take it, right? Like, I guess that could be one situation. But is there ever like a
sure.
strategic situation where you want to take both and just kind of see how you do?
If you have, although I said there's no difference in the registration cost, or not a significant difference in the registration cost, you're still spending over $200 for either test. There is a certain point where if you're taking both tests a bunch of times, the costs could rack up pretty significantly. So I think it's best to pick one and run with it. But
Hmm.
if you feel you're hitting a brick wall with one of them, then that could be a reason to do. But I wouldn't do it as a matter of course the way students often do with the SAT and the ACT on the undergraduate level.
Then yeah, that makes sense. Well, then my last question is kind of where do you see this going? Like, do you think that in the next, 5 years, there's going to be more people taking the GRE for law school? Is going to be less? Like, what is your kind of thoughts on this?
I think it'll be interesting to see. It's certainly something that GRE it would be very helpful for their business model, especially as a lot of graduate programs going test optional or even test blind. In my own experience as a parent, my daughter is in graduate school now, and for her programs for social work, not a single school to which she applied even made use of the GRE. They were quite literally test blind.
Hmm.
So they definitely need to make inroads, and that's why they've been making this push. And it's been, uh, yeah, I think very helpful to them that the B schools and the law schools have, to some extent, gone along with this. Will
Hmm.
continue. I think ETS is working very hard to help make that happen. I imagine it will continue. I'm curious to
Great.
see too.
Yeah, I know. But I think, yeah, like you said, they've already done the hard work of kind of getting the main schools interested. So then I feel like the
Yes.
dominoes kind of fall after that.
Yeah. I think it's likely, but it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks,
Thank
hosted
you.
by Tyler from Achievable with Jeff Eisenberg from Long Island Test Prep. And Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free by going to achievable.me.